नमः सर्वेभ्यः। तद्धितप्रकरणस्य अस्मिन् षष्ठे वर्गे सर्वेषां स्वागतम्। अस्मिन् वर्गे तद्धितप्रत्ययस्य उपस्थितौ यत् किमपि अङ्गकार्यं भवति तस्मिन् विषये विस्तारेण पश्यामः। आदौ वन्दनम्। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायम् अधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। किञ्चित् पुनरावर्तनम्। तद्धितप्रक्रियायाः सोपानत्रयम् अस्ति इति वयं प्रथमवर्गे दृष्टवन्तः। तत्र आदौ अर्थस्य निश्चयः करणीयः, तदनन्तरं तस्मिन् अर्थे कस्मात् प्रातिपदिकात् कः प्रत्ययः विधीयते तस्य ज्ञानं प्राप्य अनन्तरं प्रकृतिप्रत्यययोः योजनस्य कीदृशी प्रक्रिया भवति तस्य विचारः करणीयः। अर्थनिश्चयस्य विषये वयं दृष्टवन्तः यत् आदौ पञ्चमहोत्सर्गाः पाणिनिना पाठिताः सन्ति। प्राग्दिव्यतीय अर्थाः, प्राग्वहतीय अर्थाः, प्राग्घितीय अर्थाः, प्राकृतीय अर्थाः तथा प्राग्वतीय अर्थाः। एतेषु सर्वेषु अर्थेषु एकः एकः प्रत्ययः औत्सर्गिकरूपेण आगच्छति, तथा प्रत्येकस्य अर्थस्य औत्सर्गिकप्रत्ययस्य अपवादाः तस्मात् अर्थात् अनन्तरं पाठिताः सन्ति। तदनन्तरं कौमुद्याम् अन्येषां सूत्राणां विभाजनं कृत्वा 7 प्रकरणानि पाठितानि सन्ति। नयस्नयधिकारप्रकरणं, पाञ्चमिकप्रकरणं, मत्वर्थप्रकरणं, प्राग्दिशीयप्रकरणं, प्रागिवीयप्रकरणं, स्वार्थिकप्रकरणं तथा समासान्तप्रकरणम्। एतत् सर्वम् अर्थनिश्चयस्य विषये अस्माभिः पठितम्। प्रत्ययचयनस्य विषये प्रत्येकस्य महोत्सर्गस्य कश्चन औत्सर्गिकप्रत्ययः तथा प्रत्येकस्य अर्थज्ञापकसूत्रस्य विषये तस्मिन् अर्थे प्रयुक्ताः औत्सर्गिकप्रत्ययस्य अपवादाः पाठिताः सन्ति। अनन्तरं तृतीयः सोपानः अस्ति प्रक्रिया। तत्र प्रकृतिः तथा प्रत्ययः एतयोः मेलनं कृत्वा तद्धितान्तस्य निर्माणं भवति। अस्मिन् विषये वयं ह्यस्तनवर्गे अधिकं दृष्टवन्तः। प्रक्रियायाः प्रारम्भिकसोपाने इत्युक्ते प्रकृतिः प्लस् प्रत्ययः, अस्याम् अवस्थायां प्रत्यये किञ्चित् परिवर्तनं भवितुम् अर्हति, प्रकृत्यामपि किञ्चित् परिवर्तनं भवितुम् अर्हति। अतः प्रकृतिः प्लस् प्रत्ययः इत्यस्मात् आरभ्य प्रकृतेः दृश्यरूपं तथा प्रत्ययस्य दृश्यरूपं लभ्यते। तदनन्तरम् अग्रे अङ्गकार्यं, त्रिपादिकार्यं, सन्धिकार्यम् एतत् सर्वं कृत्वा तद्धितान्तस्य इत्युक्ते प्रातिपदिकस्य निर्माणं भवति। प्रत्ययस्य दृश्यरूपं प्राप्तुं मुख्यरूपेण सोपानद्वयं करणीयम्। आदौ इत्संज्ञालोपः, तदनन्तरं प्रत्ययादेशः। इत्संज्ञालोपः इति प्रक्रियायाः प्रथमः सोपानः। तत्र वयं 14 वर्णानाम् इत्संज्ञा भवति इति पठितवन्तः। इत्संज्ञकवर्णस्य प्रयोजनं नास्ति चेत् इत्संज्ञा न भवति। अतः केवलं चुटु इत्यनेन प्रत्ययस्य प्रथमः वर्णः च वर्गीयः नो चेत् ट वर्गीयः अस्ति तस्य इत्संज्ञा न भवति। यथा ढक इत्यत्र ढकारस्य किमपि प्रयोजनम् अस्माभिः पठितं नास्ति। अस्माभिः येषां 14 प्रत्ययानां शब्दानां वर्णानाम् आवली पठिता, तत्र ढकारः नास्ति। अतः ढक् इत्यस्मिन् प्रत्यये ढकारस्य इत्संज्ञा न भवति। अतः इत्संज्ञकवर्णस्य प्रयोजनं नास्ति चेत् इत्संज्ञा न भवति। अस्मिन् विषये वयं प्रामुख्येन 3 प्रयोजनानि पठामः: स्वरनिर्णयः, स्त्रीप्रत्ययविधानं तथा अङ्गकार्यम्। अतः प्रथमसोपानः अस्ति इत्संज्ञालोपः, द्वितीयः सोपानः अस्ति प्रत्ययस्य आदेशः। अस्मिन् विषये ह्यस्तनवर्गे वयं विस्तारेण 10 प्रत्ययानां 10 वर्णानां 10 आदेशाः अपठाम। खकारस्य ईन, घकारस्य इय, छकारस्य ईय, ठकारस्य इक, परन्तु केषुचन विषयेषु अंगेषु क, ढकारस्य एय, हकारस्य आयन, यू इत्यस्य अन, तत्र टाइपिंग मिस्टेक अस्ति, वू इत्यस्य अकः, सो दिस शुड बी वू, वू इत्यस्य अक, तथा अपृक्त वी इत्यस्य लोपः भवति। एतत् सर्वं प्रत्ययस्य आदौ अस्ति चेदेव भवति। तत्र प्रत्ययादीनाम् इति तत्र अनुवृत्ति अस्ति। खकारः, घकारः, छकारः एतत् सर्वं प्रत्ययस्य प्रारम्भे आदौ एव भवेयुः। ह्यस्तनवर्गे अस्माभिः एतत् चार्ट् अपि विस्तारेण दृष्टः। प्रकृतिः प्लस् तद्धित प्रत्ययः, एतयोः योजनं कुर्मश्चेत् प्रारम्भे प्रकृतेः दृश्यरूपं तथा तद्धित प्रत्ययस्य दृश्यरूपं लभ्यते। तत्र प्रकृतेः केषुचन स्थलेषु आदेशः भवितुम् अर्हति। So we saw that in cases like idam, for example, gets converted to e, or yushmad got converted to yushmak. So these are the examples that we studied in yesterday's class. But these are very rare, as I mentioned. बहुषु स्थलेषु अयम् आदेशः न भवति, न्यूनेषु स्थलेषु एव भवति। परन्तु तद्धित प्रत्ययस्य दृश्यरूपे यत् परिवर्तनमस्ति तत् प्रायः सर्वेषु प्रत्ययेषु भवति। So except for a handful of pratyayas, all of them will have an itsamnyaka varna which will go off, and a lot of them will undergo some kind of adeshas. So itsamnya lopa and pratyayadesha, these are the two steps that will convert the taddhita pratyaya to the drishya rupam. Now once you have prakrutehe drishya rupam tatha taddhita pratyasya drishya rupam, etau stah chet tesham melanam bhavati, ante taddhitantasya nirmanam bhavati. So when this combination happens, the set of karyas that happen, they are collectively known as anga karyas. We are going to study about these anga karyas in details in today's class. अस्मिन् वर्गे प्रकृतेः दृश्यरूपं तथा तद्धित प्रत्ययस्य दृश्यरूपं एतयोः मेलनेन अंगकार्यं कथं भवति तथा तद्धितान्तस्य निर्माणं कथं भवति अस्मिन् विषये विस्तारेण पश्यामः. One point to remember over here is that when this combination happens, everything that gets executed is not an angakarya. So there are some other things that also get executed, like pratyaya luka. So there is a concept called pratyaya luka. There is some other concept called pumad bhava. So I'm not expecting you to know this, but at least get familiar with the names. So there is something called as pratyaya luka. There is something called as pumad bhava. In some cases, there will be sandhi karyas like yana sandhi, ayadi sandhi, and so on. And finally, there will be some karyas which are in tripadi, which are defined in 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4, which are asiddha towards all of the Ashtadhyayi. So they are executed at the end. So these are 5 important components: angakaryam, pratyayasya luka, pumad bhava, sandhi karyam, and tripadi karyam. And they happen exactly in this sequence. These 5 steps are executed when prakrutehe drishya rupam tatha taddhita pratyasya drishya rupam etayoho melanam bhavati. Now out of these 5, pratyaya luka and pumad bhava are not very common. So they don't happen for every prakriya. Only for like 5% or 4% of the prakriyas they will happen. Sandhi karyas are pretty common, but I am going to assume that you know the most common sandhi karyas like yana sandhi, guna sandhi, ayadi sandhi. These are some trivial sandhi karyas that happen. So there is no fancy sandhi karya that is commonly seen. If there are one-off examples, we will talk about them. But most of the sandhi karyas that you will ever need are either savarna dirgha or yanadesha or guna or ayadi. So you are kind of familiar with, in basic classes also, we have studied all these. And finally, the set of tripadi karyas like nakara lopa might happen in some cases. or if required, or like padasya, some jashtvam, chartvam, and so on. These are also some common tripadi karyas, but they are not frequent. So if whenever we really need them, I will talk about them. So out of these 5 things, anga karya is most important, and virtually every Taddhita prakriya will have this anga karya. So rest of the things might or might not happen. They are not that common. So we are not going to talk about them in today's class. We are going to spend our time in studying anga karyas because it is very fundamental to the existence of Taddhita prakriya. Ataha asmin varge prakrutehe drishya rupam tatha Taddhita pratyasya drishya rupam etayoho melanam katham bhavati kim anga karyam bhavati तेन कश्चन कीदृशं तद्धित प्रत्ययस्य निर्माणं भवति एतत् सर्वं विस्तारेण पश्यामः. अतः प्रारंभे किं नाम अंगम इति पुनरेकवारं पश्यामः. So we have seen this in one of the previous classes, but again because it is the subject of the discussion today, we will go over those slides again. प्रथमाध्यायस्य चतुर्थपादस्य त्रयोदशतमं सूत्रमस्ति यस्मात् प्रत्ययविधिः तदादि प्रत्यये अंगम्. कः अर्थः? यस्मात् शब्दात् प्रत्ययः विधीयते सः शब्दः तस्मिन् प्रत्यये परे अंगसंज्ञां प्राप्नोति. So whenever you attach a pratyaya to an entity, that entity is called as angam. Now the sutra is slightly convoluted. It says tadadi pratyaye angam. So technically speaking, what this sutra means says is as follows. Whenever a pratyaya is attached to the prakriti, you take the first letter of the prakriti and you take the first letter of the pratyaya. Everything that sits in between is called anga. So see how convoluted definition is. It is not saying that an entity to which a pratyaya is attached is anga. It is not saying like that. It is saying yasmat shabdat pratyaya vidhiyate tasya shabdasya prathamaha varnaha tatha pratyayasya prathamaha varnaha etayoho madhye yat kimapi agacchati tasya nama asti angam. Now why such a convoluted definition? We will not go in the details, but I will give you a simple example. If you want to say do lat lakarasya prathama purushasya ekvachanam of say bhu, then you say bhu plus ti. Now in this particular case, what he wants to say is that it's not the bhu which is the anga, but everything that starts from bhakara up to the ti pratyaya is the anga. The reason why he says is that whenever you get an avadesha and you say bhu plus ti, bhu becomes bho and that bho becomes bhava, that entire thing bhava needs to be an angam. So it's not exactly the entity to which the pratyaya is attached, is actually everything that comes between the first letter of the prakriti and the first letter of the pratyaya. It might be a little bit confusing, but if you want to study more, this point has been detailed out on the website at this sutra. For our current discussion, it doesn't really matter any of these things. So for this current Taddhita's discussion, we will just keep the things simple and say yasmat shabdat pratyaya vidhiyate saha shabdah tasmin pratyaye pare angasanyam prapnoti. So some simple examples. Vinata plus dhaka ityatra vinata iti shabdasya angasamnya bhavati. Ekadasha plus datta ityatra ekadasha shabdasya angasamnya bhavati. Ghata plus twala ityatra ghata shabdasya. Stri plus naya ityatra stri shabdasya. Ashwapati plus ana ityatra ashwapati shabdasya. Tatha kritri plus mapa ityatra kritri shabdasya angasamnya bhavati. So this is a very simple definition that we will continue throughout this course. Now what is the purpose of this angasamnya? There is one of the very important adhikaras in Ashtadhyayi, 641, which says Angasya. So if we go to the website, it says Adhikara Sutramidam Ayam Adhikaraha Atra Arabhya Asaptamadhyaya Parisamaptehe. So starting from 6.4, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3 and 7.4. एतेषु पंचपादेषु यत् किमपि उच्यते तत् सर्वं अंगस्य भवति. So all the transformations on the anga are combined or collected in these 5 padas. Now remember that the anga samnya is for any pratyaya. It is not necessarily for taddhita pratyaya. So everything that is in this section might not make sense for taddhita pratyayas. A lot of that does make sense for taddhita pratyayas, and that's what we are going to discuss in today's class. So the goal of this class is not to understand the entire angadhikara of these 5 padas, which is very much out of scope, but we will try to understand what results or what rules from this angadhikara make a difference or matter for the taddhita prakaranam. Ataha angasya adhikare uktani mukhyani pancha uta shat sutrani vayam asmin varge pathamaha. So we are going to study only 6 or 7 sutras in class, but angasya adhikara is very big, and like 100 or 200 of this adhikar sutras of this adhikar are used in the taddhita prakaranam. So I will point you to a document which lists all these sutras. Later on, whenever we come across a corner case, we will refer to that document for that particular angakarya. So what we are going to discuss today is a general angakarya which will be applicable for like 95% of the taddhita prakriyas. There will always be some exceptions which will be listed in the document, which I will share with you at the end of the class. We will take a look at, we will keep that document as a reference, and we will take a look at the document. In the upcoming classes, we come across an exception. So the goal of today's class is to understand that basic angakarya which happens in say 90-95% of the taddhita prakriyas. Idanim taddhita pratyayana vishaye angasya अन्यापि द्वे सन्ये भवितुम् अर्हतः तस्मिन् विषये पश्यामः. So the anga for a taddhita pratyaya is either called a bha or it is called a pada. So these are the two more technical terms that are given to the anga which is attached to a taddhita pratyaya. Tatra sutrani santi yachibham Tatha Swadeshva Sarvanama Sthane. So see, the sutras are in sequence. This is 1.4.17 and this is 1.4.18. Kim Nama Yachibham? Yachi is nothing but Ya plus Achi. Ya represents a Yakara. Ach represents a Swara. Therefore, Yakaradi Taddhita Pratyaye Pare Nochet Ajadi Taddhita pratyaye pare angam bha samnyakam bhavati. So the anga gets a bha samnya when we have a yakaradi or an ajadi taddhita pratyaya in front. On the other hand, if there is any other taddhita pratyaya which is not an yakaradi or not ajadi, then we get a pada samnya. Yakaram vihaya Anyasmin haladi taddhita pratyaya pare angasya padasamnya bhavati. And a very important point, we must do the lopa and the adesha before coming to this step. So remember that from the pratyaya, the first thing that we should do is go to the pratyayasya drishya rupam. प्रत्ययस्य दृश्य रूपं प्राप्तुम् आदौ इत्सम्यकवर्णानां लोपः आवश्यकः, तदनन्तरं प्रत्ययस्य आदेशः आवश्यकः. एतत् सर्वं कृत्वा एव अङ्गसंज्ञा भसंज्ञा पदसंज्ञा इत्यस्य विचारः करणीयः। कानिचन उदाहरणानि विनता प्लस ढक। So it seems that dhakar is at the beginning, so it is not a ya and it is not an ajadi, so it looks like it becomes a pada, but that's not the case. First of all, you get rid of kakara because it is itsamnyak, and then you convert dhakara to iya as we saw in yesterday's class. Now you look at whether this is a bha or a pada. Idanim atra ikarah asti, ikarah ach pratyahare agacchati, अतः विनता शब्दस्य अंगस्य भ संज्ञा भवति. So remember that bha and pada is a samnya given to the anga and not to the pratyaya. Also remember that in this particular example, the word vinata gets a bha samnya as well as the anga samnya. So anga samnya is still there. It doesn't say that when it becomes a bha, it ceases becoming an anga. It is not saying like that. So we are saying atra vinata shabdasya bhasamnya api bhavati, anga samnya api bhavati. Anyad udharanam aditi plus nya. Atra nakarasya itsamnya lopaha yakaraha avashishyate tasya kopya adeshah nasti yakaraha अत्र य अत्र लिखितः अस्ति अतः अत्र यकारस्य क्षम्यताम् अत्र यकारस्य उपस्थितौ अदिति शब्दस्य भसंज्ञा भवति. जन प्लस तल इत्यत्र तकारः अग्रे अस्ति, लकारस्य इत्संज्ञा लोपः, तकारः अवशिष्यते. जन शब्दस्य तकारे परे भस पदसंज्ञा भवति यतः तकारः अच प्रत्याहारे नास्ति, यकारः अपि नास्ति. तथैव राजी प्लस व इत्यत्र वकारे परे अंगस्य पदसंज्ञा भवति. So this is the primary distinction between when an anga is called a bhasamnyaka versus when an anga is called a padasamnyaka. And now, as we have seen in two classes earlier, there is one exception for each of them, which we will discuss now. So the first rule says tasau matvarthe. So it says matvarthe pratyaye pare. So there is a set of pratyayas. If you recollect the division in 12 groups, one of the groups has matvarthiya prakaranam. So if there is a pratyaya from the matvarthiya prakaranam, and if the anga is a takaranta or a sakaranta, then the anga becomes a bhasamnyaka. I will give some examples and then it will become clear. So garut plus mata. इत्यत्र मत इति वस्तुतः मकारादि अस्ति, अतः पूर्वनियमेन तस्य पदसंज्ञा भवेत्, परन्तु मत् अयं प्रत्ययः मत्वर्थः अस्ति. So if you look into that sheet, you will see that there is a mat pratyay listed over there, and angam takarantam asti, takarantam angam asti, तथा प्रत्ययः मत्वर्थीयः अस्ति, अतः अत्र पदसंज्ञां बाधित्वा भसंज्ञा विधीयते. अत्रापि तादृशमेव विद्वस् इति सकारान्त शब्दः अस्ति, अतः मत्वर्थे प्रत्यये परे पदसंज्ञां बाधित्वा भसंज्ञा विधीयते. तृतीयम् उदाहरणम् अत्र विनी, अयमपि प्रत्ययः मत्वर्थीयः अस्ति. So the only trick to know whether a pratyay is matvarthi or not, you go in that sheet and see if it's so. If you go to sites, the resources are listed here, and there is a Taddhita Sutranam Dvadasha Vargaha. If you go over there, there is this Matvartha Prakaranam number 8, Matvarthiya Prakaranam. So every sutra, every pratyaya in this Prakaran is not Matvarthiya, but you scroll down, there is these 4 sutras over here. So these pratyaya cha, ana, vuna, and then there is another big list over here. So like Matup, which is what we just saw, or Vini, which is another pratyaya that we saw, Yus, Alach. So all these are basically Matvarthiya pratyayas. So these big set and these 4 are called Matvarthas collectively. And for these Matvarthas, so Vini, tatra sakaranta angam asti ata tasya bhasamnya bhavati. Vata ityatra takarantam asti ata tasya bhasamnya bhavati. So this is a place where the padasamnya tam badhitva bhasamnya vidhanam bhavati. Similarly, there is one place where bhasamnyam badhitva padasamnya विधानं भवति. सिति च इति तस्य सूत्रं सित् प्रत्यये परे अंगस्य पदसंज्ञा भवति. So if there is a sakara in the pratyaya which is its samyaka, the anga gets a padasamya. So here are some examples. Parshu plus nas. So now na is actually its samyaka. It goes off leaving behind as. So it is ajadi pratyaya. So technically speaking, it should get a bhasamya. Parantu ayam sit pratyaya asti. Sakar also goes away by its samya. So only a remains over here. And because this is a sit pratyaya, siti cha ittarena tasya padasamya bhavati. Tathaiva urna plus yusa, yadyapi pratyah yakaradi asti, tathapi sit asti, sakarasya itsamya lopaha bhavati, ataha asya padasamya bhavati. So sham plus yasa, ritu plus ghasa, ityatra padasamya bhavati. So why this distinction is what we are going to learn in today's class. There are certain karyas which are defined for a general anga. There are certain karyas which are defined for a bhasamyaka. And there are certain karyas which are defined for a padasamyaka. Now the karyas that are defined for a padasamyaka don't come in angadhikara, they come in tripadi. So we will not be talking about them today. But the karyas that are defined for a general anga and the karyas that are defined for a particular bhasamyaka come in the angadhikara, and which is what we are going to study in next half an hour. Ataha tatra angasya bhasamya bhavati uta padasamya bhavati asmin vishaye vistarena jnanam avashyakam asti. So this is a flowchart that you can refer to. So you start with the prakriti and pratyaya or their drishya rupa, whatever. And then you just follow these conditions. If it is a sita pratyaya, it is a padasamya. If it is not sita pratyaya, then the other condition. Yes, go here, no, go here. You follow this chart, exactly details out when the prakriti gets a padasamya, whereas when the prakriti gets a bhasamya. So on the website, if you, on the resources page, there is this bhasamya, padasamya, nirnaya flow chart. So there is this flow chart already available on the website. You can take a look at it if you want anytime later. So now with this, let's talk about Taddhita pratyayeshu pareshu jayamanani angakaryani. Prakriyayam pratyaye pare angasya kinchit parivartanam bhavati. Etadeva parivartanam angakaryam namna jnayate. So there is some transformation in the anga, and this is called as angakarya. Now these transformations in the anga are of many types. But if you zoom out a little bit, you will see that most of them fall in one of the three buckets. And these three buckets are listed over here. Taddhita pratyaye pare angakaryam pramukhyena trividham asti. Adivarana karyam. So there will be some transformation that happens on the first letter or first swara. So it can be either the first letter or first swara or first vyanjan of the anga. So it is something related to the beginning. Or T karyam. So the karya that is specifically related to the T samyaka. And Antima Varna Karyam. So the Karyam that is specifically related towards the end. So it can be exactly the last or it can be the second last or whatever. So Upadha Varnasya Nochit Antima Varnasya. So on a high level, you can divide the Karyas into three groups. The Karya that happens towards the beginning of the Anga, the Karya that happens towards the end of the Anga, and the Karya that happens to the T Samyaka of the Anga. And this is not an extensive list. So this is a disclaimer. Vishishta shabdanam krute kanichana anyani anga karyani api vartante. So there are some words for which a completely new adesha is given. Or there are some words in which an agama is introduced somewhere in between. Or there are some words for which some lopa happens for an intermediate letter. So there will always be some exceptions. There is a sheet which we will talk about it discuss towards the end of today's class. And I will walk you through that sheet there you will see all these corner cases listed down. But they are not required for today's class. For today's class, if we study these three important buckets very well, we should be in a good position to derive 95% of the Taddhita Prakriyas. So there are going to be some exceptions around here and there, but they are, I mean, the number of sutras is pretty high, but the area that they cover is very small. So each of these sutras will give an exception for, say, a handful set of words. But otherwise, the general prakriya, the general angakarya can be classified into these three buckets: adivarnasya karyam, nochet ti pratyayasya ti samnyakasya karyam, nochet antima varnasya karyam. Atah adivarnasya kim karyam asti tat prarambhe pashyamah. So the most important karya for the adivarna is the vruddhi. So what is vruddhi? Ashtadhyayaha prathamam sutram vruddhiradayich akara aikara aukaraha vruddhi samnyakaha bhavanti. So using this definition, there is a concept called as vruddhi adesha. When an akara or an akara is converted to an akara, or when an I is converted into an I, or when O is converted into an O, or when a R is converted into an R, we say it is a vruddhi adesha. Atatra pashyatu pramukhyena atra A, E, Au tatha A. Ete eva adesha rupena agachanti. Ataha ete vruddhi samnyakaha santi. Ete eva adesha rupena agachanti. Ataha asya nama vruddhi adeshaha. So by sthanentartamaha, for akara and akara, for the same uchcharana sthana, we get akara. Similarly, for each of them, the talu is the uchcharana sthana, so we get I, and so on. I'm sure you have studied all this in the introductory classes. So the most important karya that happens, the adivarna karya that happens when a taddhita pratyaya is in front, is the vruddhi adesha. And this vruddhi adesha is given over here. Nit, nit, tatha kit taddhita pratyaye pare angasya adivarnasya vruddhi adesha bhavati. So we saw this in brief when we talked about the itsamya prayojanam. Today we will see this in significant details. Kanichan udaharanani pashyamaha. Ashwapati plus ana. Sarva prathamam anakarasya itsamya lopaha. So you get ashwapati plus a. Idanim ayam णकारः अस्ति अत्र अतः णित् प्रत्ययः अस्ति अतः अंगस्य यः आदि स्वरः आदि वर्ण by आदि वर्ण I mean आदि स्वर over here because a vruddhi can only be is only defined for a swara. So अंगस्य यः आदि स्वरः tasya vruddhiः bhavati. So a goes to a, therefore this a will go to a. So ashwapati plus ana, it will give an ashwapati plus ana, and then finally some additional steps happen which we will see towards the end of the class. Ashwapata. Anyad udaharanam pashyamah. Sheeta plus shaya. Shakarasya itsamya, yakarasya itsamya, lopaha, sheeta plus ya. Ikarasya vruddhihi ai. So see here, ikarasya vruddhihi ai. So shaita plus ya, shaitya. So there is some additional prakriya involved over there. Shubhra plus dhaka. Atra prarambhe kakarasya itsamya lopaha pratyayasya adeshaha. So the dhak pratyay gets converted into the drishya rupam eya. So till this happens, we don't touch the anga. Anga remains as it is. So shubhra plus eya. At this stage, the original pratyay was kita. Therefore, shu will become shau. Ukarasya. Atra pashyatu. Ukarasya aukaraha bhavati. So shubhra plus eya. Shaubhra plus eya. Additional prakriya happens. Shaubhreya. Krishna plus ana. Kru ityasya kar iti bhavati. So ru becomes ar, kr will become kar, Krishna plus ana, karshna plus a, karshna. Deva plus aya. So it is ekar over here, and the pratyaya is nit. So understand, this is only for a nit, kitta and nit pratyayas, not for all the pratyayas. So deva plus aya ityatra, kshamyatam, deva plus aya ityatra ekarasya vruddhihi. So see, where is a is here, ekarasya vruddhihi aikaraha, deva plus aya, daiva plus a, daiva. Finally, kausalya plus dhaka, pratyayasya drishyarupam bhavati eya, kausalya plus eya. So this is aukara. Aukara gets converted to aukara again. So it's a same letter that comes as an adesha. So kausalya plus eya, again kausalya plus eya, some additional prakriya happens, kausalyeya. Ataha adivarna karyam. So this happens for the nit, nit and kit pratyayas. All the nit and kit pratyayas cause the first swara of the anga to get converted to a vruddhi adesha. Anena prakarena अंगस्य आदिवर्णस्य कित् णित् तथा कित् णित् ङित् तथा कित् प्रत्यये परे वृद्धि आदेशः भवति. Let's go to the second bucket, the T karyas. Now there are two of them, so we say T karyam 1 and T karyam 2. Tasmat purvam kim nama T iti kinchit punaravartanam achontyadi T as iti tasya sutram. Shabdasya yaha antimah achvarnah tasmat arabhya शब्दस्य अंतिम वर्ण पर्यंतम यहां वर्ण समूहः तस्य टी संज्ञा भवति. So what does this mean? You look at the last swara of the word and from that place you take everything till the end. So ramam iti vadamaschet makarottarah akarah tatra antima swarah asti tasmad arabhya anta paryantam. So ramam atra am iti टी संज्ञक. Rame ityatra kevalam ekaraha eva ante asti. So you take the last swara and there is nothing after it. So you just take that. Pricha ityatra ekaha eva swarah asti r. Atah sa eva antimah swarah. Tasmat arabhya shabdasya anta paryantam. Richa. So the segment starting from the last swara up to the end of the word is called a T samnya, and if the Taddhita pratyaya is a dit Taddhita pratyaya, then the T samnyak part gets removed. Dit Taddhita pratyaye pare angasya T samnyakasya lopah bhavati. Udaharanani pashyamah. Ekadashan plus dat. So this is a dat. So it is a dit pratyaya. Ekadashan ityatra an iti T samnyaka, so that an will go off. Ekadash, the half sh will remain. Finally the prakriya happens. This datta, dakara goes off, takara goes off, kevalam akara avashishyate. Ekadash plus a, ekadash. Trimshat. So trimshat ityatra at iti T samnyakah tasya lopah bhavati. Trimsh plus a, trimsha. Pandu plus dyana. So dyana iti dit pratyayah, dakarasya lopah, nakarasya lopah, yakarah avashishyate. Pandu plus ya, ukarah iti T samnyaka. So there is no vyanjana after it, is the last swara that becomes T samnyaka. Ukarah T samnyakah tasya lopah. Pand plus ya, pandya. Mahish plus matup. So dakara goes off. Mahish plus matup. Mahish plus mata. Mahish plus mata. So akar goes off. Mahishmat. Finally, nala plus dwalacha. Nada plus dwalacha. डकारोत्तरः अकारः तस्य लोपः भवति नड्वल। अनेन सूत्रेण डित् तद्धित प्रत्यये परे अंगस्य टी सम्यकस्य लोपः भवति। So in the previous case, it was a nit or a kit or a nyit, and the effect was adivruddhi. In the current case, it is dit, and the effect is t samyaka lopa. There is one more point to understand over here. This tehe comes in the bhasya adhikara. I have mentioned this 2 classes earlier, but this bhasya adhik, but I'm repeating it again. This te comes in bhasya adhikara. But the bhasya adhikara is a little bit broken down over here. Khandanam bhavati kinchit. See what the Kashika says over here. Diti abhasya api anubandha karna samarthya tilopaha. So even if there is a bhasya adhikara, you see over here there is a bhasya adhikara running. However, abhasya api tilopaha. So this sutra is applicable for a non-bhasamyaka also, even if it comes in the bhasya adhikara. And therefore we just say angasya over here, dit taddhita pratyaya pare angasya ti samyakasya lopaha bhavati. The second T karya that we want to see is this. Taddhita pratyaya pare. So now this is any taddhita pratyaya, not necessarily nit, dit, whatever. Taddhita pratyaya pare nakarantasya angasya ti samyakasya lopaha bhavati. So if there is a nakaranta anga, like rajan for example, taddhita pratyaya pare tasya ti samyakasya lopaha bhavati. Kanichan udharanani pashyamaha. Uduloman iti shabdaha tasmat iya iti pratyaya bhavati. Now see the prakriya step by step. The first thing is yakarasya lopaha. Tad halantyam ityanena itsamnya tasya lopaha ityanena itsamnya lopaha. So we get uduloman plus e itsamnyaka lopaha. Now observe that this is a yit pratyaya. Therefore we have to do adi vruddhi. So let's do that first. Ukarasya vruddhi au. So auduloman plus e. So instead of uduloman, we write auduloman plus e. Now remember that this is a nakaranta pratipadikam, and therefore by nas taddhite, this sutra, taddhita pratyaya pare nakarantasya angasya ti samyakasya lopaha bhavati. So the ti samyaka over here, which is an, it will get removed and a half ma will remain. So audulom plus e combined together, audulomi. So this is now how you have visualized the entire prakriya. We use 2 components. We use the adivruddhi, we use the t lopa. Let's take another example. Madrarajan plus tacha. Takarasya itsamnya, chakarasya itsamnya, akaraha avashishyate. Madrarajan plus a. Now atra nyit dit kit nyit kimapi nasti. Atha atra adivruddhi na bhavati. So there, here it was an adivruddhi because we had a yakara over here. Here there is no such itvarna, so there is no adivruddhi. So directly madraraj plus a. So anna iti ti samyaka tasya lopaha bhavati. Madraraj plus a madraraja. So madrarajan plus tacha iti madraraja. Atra nas taddhite ityanena nakarantasya angasya ti samyakasya lopaha bhavati. So this presentation will be made available later on. You can take a look at the website. There are links to the corresponding sutras in case you want to study them in details. So studying sutras is optional. Understanding the concepts behind them is really important. That's why I'm skipping the sutras, but I'm taking most of the time to explain the concepts over here. So these were the 2 T karyas. One was the dit pratyaya pare ti samyakasya lopaha. Second was sarveshu taddhita pratyayeshu pareshu nakarantasya angasya ti samyakasya lopaha. Now we will go about with the next to the third category, the antima varna karyam. Now just like the way for the beginning there was a vruddhi, for the adi varna karyam there was a vruddhi. Similarly for the antima varna karyam there is a guna. अकारः अकारः एकारः ओकारः एते सर्वे अदेङ्गुणः इत्यनेन गुणसंज्ञकाः भवन्ति इति वयं सर्वे जानीमः। अस्मादेव सूत्रात् गुण आदेशः कथं भवति तस्य ज्ञानं प्राप्यते। So a and a get converted to a स्थानेन्तरतमः again. E, a, I get converted to a, talu. U, o get converted to o, and r gets converted to ar, urandraparaha. So it takes akara, and then by urandraparaha, refa comes over there. So these a, o, and a are guna samnyaka, and therefore this is called a guna adesha. And what is the important rule? O varnanta bhasamnyakasya taddhita pratyaya pare gunadeshah bhavati. So now if you take any taddhita pratyaya, but the anga is a bhasamnyaka and the anga is a u varnanta, so it should end in an ukara and it should get a bhasamnya. Then it will get a gunadesha. So ukarasya okarah bhavati. So ukarasya gunadesha okaraha. So even if we listed the entire all possible conversions, for this particular case, it's only U to O that we really require. So some example. Shishu plus ana. Sarva prathamam it samnya lopaha. Shishu plus a. Now this is a nitya pratyaya, so adi vruddhi. So we are doing the karyas in the sequence we studied. So adi vruddhi, she becomes shai. So shaishu plus a. Now at this stage, this is a. Therefore, this gets a bha samnya and there is an ukara at the end. So this is an u varnanta bha samnyaka anga. Therefore, ukarasya gunaha okaraha shaisho plus a echo yavayavaha shaishava. So this is an example where we see the sandhi karyas also happening. So, and as I mentioned earlier, they are the simple ach sandhi karyas like ayadi sandhi, guna sandhi, vriddhi sandhi, and so on. So shaisho plus a shaishava. Atra pashyatu, atra u varnanta iti likhitam asti, ukaranta iti likhitam nasti. So when we say ukara, it only means rasva ukara. But when we say u varna, it means rasva as well as dirgha. So always remember this distinction. If you use the letter, if you use this word kara, like akara or ikara or ukara, it only indicates that particular rasva entity. But if you say varna, then it will mean all the bhedas, the rasva as well as dirgha and pluta and so on. So here is another example. Ruru. So this is the dirgha ukaranta shabdaha. Ruru plus ana. Ruru plus a. Ukara. So adi vruddhi. So first thing is adi vruddhi. Ana is there. Nit pratyasti. Ukarasya vruddhi. Aukaraha. Rauru plus a. Now this is a bha samnyaka anga because there is an akara sitting over here. Ukaraha asti. U varnaha asti, dirgha ukaraha asti. Ataha u varnanta bha samnyakasya taddhita pratyaya pare gunadeshah bhavati. So see, dirgha u also goes to o. So rau ro, echo yavayavaha, rau rava. Anena prakarena rasva u varnaha nochet dirgha u varnaha yasya bha samnyakasya ante asti tasya sarveshu taddhita pratyeshu pareshu gunadeshah bhavati. Now let's go to the second antima varna karyam. We talked about an u varnanta bha samnyaka just now. This second karya talks about a varnanta bha samnyaka and e varnanta bha samnyaka. So now we can plot the similarity. It is talking about a varnanta bha samnyaka and e varnanta bha samnyaka. So a varnanta means a and a, e varnanta means e and e. And earlier we saw u varnanta, which is u and u. So earlier we saw u varnantasya bha samnyakasya gunaha bhavati. अत्र वयं किं पठामः? अवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकः अस्ति नो चेत् ईवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकः अस्ति तर्हि तस्य अन्तिमवर्णस्य लोपः भवति. So it just gets removed. And this is also yasyeti cha is one of the very important sutras in the Taddhita Prakaranam. So some examples over here. Daksha plus iya. Yakarasya itsamnya lopaha. Daksha plus i. Yit pratyaya asti ataha adivruddhi. So that is the first thing you should do. The becomes da. Daksha plus e. Now at this stage, E is ach letter and therefore daksha gets a bha samnya. Ayam avarnanta bha samnyakah shabdah asti ataha asya antima varnasya lopah bhavati. So the akara that follows the ksha is removed because of yasyeti cha. Punadekavaram vadami etad bha samnyakam angam asti एतद् अकारान्तं भसंज्ञकम् अंगम् अस्ति अतः अवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकस्य तद्धित प्रत्यये परे लोपः भवति. So that akara is removed. Daksh plus e dakshi. द्वितीयम् उदाहरणं पृथा plus अय. ञकारस्य इत्संज्ञा लोपः पृथा plus अ. अकारः अस्ति अतः पृथा शब्दस्य भसंज्ञा भवति. अस्य अन्ते आकारः अस्ति. So a is also included in the a varna. Therefore तस्य आकारस्य लोपः भवति. तस्मात् पूर्वं क्षम्यतां तस्मात् पूर्वम् आदिवृद्धिः करणीया. So pru becomes par. Partha plus a. After the adivruddhi akarasya lopah. Parth plus a. Partha. So a lot of familiar words now you can see falling in place just by these 2 or 3 angakaryas that we learned in today's class. Vinata plus dhaka. Kakarasya itsamnya lopaha. Dhakarah avashishyate. Tasya adeshah eya. So vinata plus eya. Kit pratyayah asti ataha adivruddhihi. Vinata V becomes Y. Vainata plus Aya. Aka. So this is a ach varna. Ataha asya bhasamnya bhavati. Bhasamnyaka varnasya ante akarah asti. Asya akarasya taddhita pratyaye pare lopah bhavati. Ataha vainat plus Aya. Vainateya. Final example. Kunti plus dhaka. Same pratyaya dhaka. Kunti plus dha. Kunti plus eya. Kaunti plus eya. Adivruddhim krutva ukarasya aukaraha. Atra ikaraha ante asti. So there is a taddhita pratyaya and there is a ikara at the end. Ikara is included in the sutra. I varnanta includes a dirgha ikara. अतः ईकारांत भसंज्ञकस्य अंतिम वर्णस्य तद्धित प्रत्यये परे लोपः भवति. ई गेट्स रिमूव्ड. कौन्त प्लस एय कौन्तेय वर्णमेलनं कृत्वा कौन्तेय. एतादृशं. सो व्हाट वी सॉ इन द प्रीवियस रूल, यदि उवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकम् अस्ति चेत् गुणः भवति. इन दिस रूल वी सॉ अवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकम् अस्ति नो चेत् ईवर्णान्त भसंज्ञकम् अस्ति चेत् लोपः भवति. Let's go to the third karya. So in some cases, when we have an uvarnanta bhasamnyaka anga, instead of doing the guna, we really need to do the lopa. So understand how far we have come so far. When there was an uvarnanta bhasamnyaka anga, we told there will be a guna. On the other hand, when we have an avarnanta or an ivarnanta bhasamnyaka anga, we said that there will be a lopa. Now in some cases, we need the lopa even if it is an uvarnanta bhasamnyaka anga. So that's this third antima varna karyam. If there is a dhakaradi pratyaya in front, ढकारादि प्रत्यये परे उवर्णान्त क्षम्यताम् उवर्णान्त भ सम्यकस्य अन्तिम वर्णस्य गुणादेशं बाधित्वा लोपः भवति. So there was an gunadesha mandated by or gunaha, but that's now prohibited specifically for a pratyaya which is dhakaradi. So that's what this part says. Dhe lopaha dhakaradi pratyaye pare lopaha bhavati. So an example, shita bahu plus dhaya. Nyit pratyaya asti yakarasya lopaha bhavati. Dhakarasya eya iti adeshah bhavati. So I have omitted one step just to save the space. Shitabahu plus eya. It is a nyit pratyaya. She becomes shai adivruddhihi ikarasya aikaraha. Shaitabahu plus eya. At this stage, this is actually a jadi. So this becomes a bhasamnyaka. This is an ukara. So it is an uvakaranta bhasamnyaka. अतः वस्तुतः अस्य गुणः भवेत् परन्तु ढकारादि प्रत्ययः अस्ति अतः गुणं बाधित्वा लोपः भवति. So that u gets removed. शैतबाह plus eya शैतबाहेय. See, if guna would have happened, it would have become शैतबाहो plus eya शैतबाहवेय, which is not correct. Guna does not happen. Ukara is removed by this sutra and you get shaita baheya. Anyad udharanam, very famous word Markandeya can be derived with this. Mrukandu plus dhaka. Mrukandu plus eya. So here there was a dhaya pratyaya. Here there was a dhaka pratyaya. So the actual pratyaya doesn't matter as long as it is dhakaradi. So mrukandu plus eya. Kit asti atah adivruddhi rakarasya vruddhi ar. Markandu plus eya. Ukarasya lopaha. Markand plus eya. Markandeya. So this is how, if there is a dhakaradi pratyaya, then uvarnanta bhasamnyakasya antima varnasya gunadesham badhitva lopaha bhavati. Now there is one exception to this rule. This one particular word kadru. That's what he says in the sutra. Dhe lopaha akadrvaha. So there is this particular word called kadru. Asya shabdasya vishaye ayam lopaha na bhavati. So this particular lopa which has been told doesn't happen for this particular word kadru. And therefore we fall back to the gunadesha. If there is no lopa, the default karya gunadesha will definitely happen. So kadru plus dhaka. So this is kadru, dirgha u. Kadru plus dhaka. Kadru plus eya. Kadru plus eya. So adivruddhihi. A becomes a. And then u becomes o. Kadro plus eya. Kadraveya. Avadeshaha. So kadru shabdasya vishaye ayam lopaha na bhavati. Anyesham ukaranta shabdanam vishaye tu ayam lopaha. Uvarnanta shabdanam vishaye tu ayam lopaha bhavati. Now one point over here, why did Panini create an exception called kadru? So if you think of this question, then the answer to this question is as follows. Panini did not create this exception. Vyakarana is specifically written to justify the usages in the language. Sadhu shabdanam prakriya katham bhavati tad darshaitum vyakaranasya nirmanam krutam asti. So these rules are not randomly created by Panini and then he said, okay, now I have created the rules, the language will follow. Is basically there was a language and he tried to build a system to capture its rules. Therefore, in the language, the word kadru was behaving in a different way than other words like mrukandu or shitabahu, and therefore he had to create this exception by saying dhe lopaha akadrvaha. So it is not, so this rule is complex, I understand, but this complexity is not forced by the acharya. It's actually present in the language which has been represented in this form by Acharya. So all in all, we have 3 different Antima Varna Karyas. If there is an, and all of them are related to the Bhasamnyaka Anga. If there is an Uvarnanta Bhasamnyaka Anga, it undergoes a Gunadesha. If there is an Avarnanta or a Ivarnanta Bhasamnyaka Anga, then it Antima Varnasya Lopaha Bhavati. Parantu Dhakaradi Pratyaye Pare Uvarnanta Bhasamnyakasya Api Lopaha Bhavati. And specifically for the word Kadru, we go back to the Gunadesha. So that's all about the major set of Anga Karyas that we will need for like 90% of the cases. So Adi Varna Karyam, Tatra Ekameva Karyam Asmabhi Drishtam, Nit Kit Pratyaye Pare, Angasya Adi Varnasya Vruddhya Adesha Bhavati. Second was T Karyam. So there we saw 2 Karyas. Dit Taddhita Pratyaye Pare, Angasya Tisamnyakasya Lopaha Bhavati. तथा सर्वेषु तद्धित प्रत्ययेषु परेषु नकारान्तस्य अंगस्य टी संज्ञकस्य लोपः भवति. And finally, अंतिम वर्ण कार्यम, we saw 3 of them. उवर्णान्त भ संज्ञकस्य गुणादेशः. The exception to that, for the ढकारාदि प्रत्ययास कद्रु शब्दं विहाय अन्यस्य उवर्णान्त भ संज्ञकस्य गुणादेशं बाधित्वा लोपः. And if it is avarnanta or ivarnanta, it is always lopaha. So these are 6 different major buckets or major karyas that you should definitely memorize. Now Angadhikara is not small. It spans 5 padas. So there are hundreds of sutras in this Angadhikara. So there are definitely much more Anga karyas which are given as exceptions to these primary 6 set of karyas. All these Anga karyas are listed in this document. So if you go to the website, this document is also available in the website. So if you go to the resources page in the website, you see the last link, Taddhita Pratyayeshu Pareshu Jayamanani Anga Karyani. So if you click over there, there are a huge set of Anga karyas that you can see listed in this document. This document is incomplete. There are many more Anga karyas which I have yet to add over there, but I will add these as and when we come those across. I mean, if I present you a document with say 500 rules, it will only add to the complexity. So I have tried to create a basic framework for now, and I will add various Anga karyas step by step. So this is the first Adivruddhi section which we saw. The 2 cases of Tilopa is what we saw. And the Antima Varna Lopa is what we saw. So these are the first 4 important aspects in this document which we saw today. Now if you go to Adivruddhi, you will see there are so many sutras of Adivruddhi. Only the first and the second sutra are really the generic ones. So Nit Taddhita Pratyaye Pare Angasya Adivarnasya Vruddhyadeshah Bhavati Tatha Kit Pratyaye Pare Angasya Adivarnasya Vruddhyadeshah Bhavati. These are the 2 ones which we saw today. A lot of others, so there are like 31 total. So 29 others are there, but they are very specific to certain cases. So see here, for the words like Devika, Shinshapa and so on, this rule exists. Then for the words like Kekaya, Mitrayu, this rule exists and so on. So there will be rules for individual Pratipadiks. I'm not expecting you to memorize or even read this, but at least make sure, go through it and understand that there is such a document which we will refer in and out or wherever required throughout this course. So there is a sutra number. There is the actual sutra which will take you to the website. There is a sutrartha in simple Sanskrit over here. And there is some karyam. So this is Adivruddhi, Adivruddhi. Then it says Adivruddhim Badhitva Akaradesha, Adivruddhi and Iya Adesha and so on. So there are additional karyas given over here and one example or two examples for each of them. Similarly, if you go to the second tab, there will be some T-lopa. So this is what we saw. Nakarantasya bhasamnyakasya tehe taddhita pratyaye pare lopaha bhavati. So T-lopa, then there will be some cases where that T-lopa nishedha will happen. Then there will be some cases that the nishedha is negated. So there will be Tilopa and so on. So understand the depth. We are in Ashtadhyayi, and there are going to be, I mean, exceptions and exceptions to exceptions and exceptions to exceptions to exceptions are bound to happen. This is not a simple grantha to digest. But it is very important that we have a systematic arrangement of these sutras so that later on when we require, we can quickly refer to them. So for example, going down the line, if we have a Nakaranta Pratipadika that comes across, then we can quickly refer to this sheet and say, okay, is it an Atmana and is it a Kha Pratyaya? Then this is the sutra that we have to apply. So take this sheet as a reference material rather than something that you need to memorize. Okay, so there are various sections over here. Some sections are very small. So or guna, I have not added any exceptions to this. There are some upadhavarana lopa, there is some samprasarana and so on. In some cases, there are some adeshas specific to certain pratyayas. So these are 3 pratyayas, ishthan, imanich, iyasun. For these pratyayas, there will be some lopa and so on. So this is, I'm not expecting you, let me repeat this, I'm not expecting you to even read this, but I'm expecting you to have an understanding that this is a reference that we will be going through or we will be using whenever required throughout this course. But I certainly expect you to understand these 6 anga karyas that we studied today. So now how do we write the prakriya? Here is a simple example, and then there will be exercises. You will have to write the prakriyas for them in exactly this form. So this is not something that is the standard, or this is not something that is a benchmark for writing prakriyas. This is the way I have been writing prakriyas, and I have studied the prakriya writing in this way. So I'm advocating this. So let's take this particular example, kunja plus chphaya. So in the first step, we get rid of the itsamnyaka varnas and we say which sutras and what do they do. So kunja plus chphaya ityatra chutu ityanena chakarasya itsamnya bhavati, halantyamiti yakarasya itsamnya bhavati, tasya lopaha iti tayoho lopaha bhavati, hakara avashishyate. So wherever required or wherever possible, please mention sutras. Whenever it is not possible or wherever you don't know the sutras, you just tell the angakarya. So instead of chutu iti chakarasya itsamnya, it's okay if you just say chakarasya itsamnya, but it's always better to mention sutras whenever you are aware of it. In the second step, tha becomes ayana. Ayaneyiniha phadakachagam pratyadinam iti yastana varge asmabhi drishtam anena sutrena thakarasya ayana iti adeshah bhavati. Atra nyakarah asti, atah adivruddhi is the first step. Kunja tasya kaunja plus ayana tadditeshvachamadehe iti adivruddhi bhavati. Tadanantaram atra ayana iti bhasamnyaka angam asti, ayana iti ajadi pratyaya asti, atah bhasamnyakam angam asti, tasya antima avarnasya yasyeti cheti lopaha kaunj plus ayana iti antima akara lopaha kaunjayana varnamelanam. So this is how we typically write the prakriya. If there is some other method that you are using and you are used to it, you can continue using that. But if there is no particular preference for you, I suggest that you start using this technique of writing the prakriya. So then here is an abhyasa. Nimna likhitaha taddhita prakriyaha yathashakyam chet sasutram nidarshayata. So at least show the prakriya. If possible, go through this, explain this, mention the sutra. So there are like 3 into 5, 15 examples. Aham plus yusa, jambu plus dhaka, dharma plus thaka, and so on. So try referring to all the resources. So the resources are there on the website. The Taddhita Pratyayavali, this, as I mentioned in yesterday's class, it will tell you the Drishya Rupa of the Pratyaya. So you can use that for doing the Drishya Rupa, and then you can use the last sheet for learning the Angakarya. So all these questions that I have presented on this slide, all these can be done using only the 6 fundamental Angakaryas that we studied today. So you don't have to refer to that advanced Angakaryas and exceptions and all that, at least for this exercise. But going ahead, Whenever we have additional cases where we need to refer to those prakriyas, those rules, we will refer to that sheet. So that's all for today's class. From next week onwards, we will jump to the Arthajnapaka Sutras. So with this class, we have studied significant portion of the Taddhita prakriya. So next time, so for example, when I say Shivadibhya ana, ityanena Shiva shabdat apatyarthe ana pratyaya bhavati. So if I tell that the word Shiva gets an ana pratyaya, it should immediately click in your brain what happens when Shiva plus ana are combined and how is the word Shaiva formed. So in all the classes going ahead, we will be jumping through the prakriyas, quickly going through the steps without really bothering about what each of the sutra or what each of the steps mean. So it is very important that you use the next whole week to try and do this abhyasa seriously. And then also if you have any other Taddhita book, you can try opening it and pick up any random pratyaya, any random pratipadika and try to see if you can do this reaction. It's fun and it will help you learn a lot of things. Okay, and there is always that sheet. So if you are somebody who wants to jump a little bit ahead, you can take a pratipadika and you can use that sheet to find if there is an additional angakarya which is required other than these 6. So with this note, we will stop for today's class. As usual, if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to email me. The next class will be next week on the same time. I will send an email a day or 2 before the class. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानाम् उपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान् यो विलक्षणम् सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रम् तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. धन्यवादः.